following subject matter is real and only intended for mature audiences. Discretion is advised.
People are dead after deputies say a man went on a shooting rampage.
I knew a week before she died I was going to kill her.
I can tell you the scene out there is absolutely horrific.
Nobody knows where this individual may strike next.
This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. If you're brand new to this podcast, I really appreciate you deciding to listen today, and I hope by the end of it you'll become a subscriber. Take a look at where you're listening right now. Even if you are not a new listener, but take a look at where you're listening right now. Find the subscribe button. And I realize that not all places where you can listen say subscribe, but it's something along that line. Subscribe, collect, follow, or in some cases, just a little plus button. You can figure it out. I believe in you. And when you subscribe to this podcast, you'll get every episode as soon as it comes out. And you won't miss any in the future. You don't have to go searching for 10-Minute Murder every time you think I might have released an episode because it'll come to you automatically. And lastly, before we get started, make sure you are following 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links for that are in the show notes of this episode. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can follow along there. And that's where I post visuals that go along with the episodes. It's usually nothing gross and graphic, but it's faces to the people that you're hearing about, maybe locations as well. So Facebook, Instagram, just type in 10-Minute Murder and it'll pop right up, or click the link in the show notes of this episode. Now the story today, it's going to be one that if you're into fashion, you probably know a pretty good bit about. But even if you aren't, even if you're that person that wears those weird rubber shoes that look like feet, I don't know what the story with those are, why people thought that was a good idea. But my point is, you don't even have to be into fashion. You could be oblivious to what good fashion is, and this is still going to be an interesting story for you to hear about. And by the way, if you are that person that wears those shoes that looks like a rubber glove, but it's not a rubber glove, it's a shoe, if you're that person, just know that your family is a little bit embarrassed of you. Okay, let's get to today's story. On July 17th, 1997, the murder of Gianni Versace rocked the fashion world. The investigation into what happened would uncover a killer who thrived on attention and luxury. It took the police less than 3 hours to figure out who the person responsible was, as by the time of the fashion mogul's death, the shooter was already hunted for the murders of 4 others. But what was the connection between Versace and 27-year-old Andrew Cunanan, and what propelled him into a murderous rampage? Andrew Philip Cunanan was born on August 31st, 1969, in San Diego, California, being the youngest of 4 children of Pete and Mary Ann. While Pete was a Filipino-born Navy veteran turned stockbroker, Mary was an Italian-American stay-at-home mom. It was pretty clear from the start that Andrew was the apple of his parents' eye. But while Pete and Mary spoiled their precious child every way possible, the two had serious issues with each other and often engaged in fights. Peter later said that Andrew was the only reason their relationship did not end sooner, and he and Mary didn't want to break their family apart before their youngest child turned 18. As if seeing his parents argue all the time was a better option for Andrew. During his high school years, Andrew enrolled in the prestigious Bishop's School in the La Jolla neighborhood of San Diego. He was a brilliant student with an IQ of 147 and enough skills to speak 7 languages and to memorize the encyclopedia. However, he still felt less than because most of his fellow students came from wealthier families. To fit in, Andrew began to tell made-up stories about his background, even claiming at one point that his father was an Israeli millionaire and a Fifth Avenue aristocrat. This, of course, was not true at all. Pretty much the opposite. Pete, his father, had financial problems that eventually resulted in him escaping back to Manila in 1988 after committing fraudulent trading activities. While Andrew's lies were clearly a coping mechanism after the trauma of his parents' difficult marriage and his father abandoning him, Andrew also wanted to live the life of luxury that he had lied about so many times. Soon after Pete left the family and took all of his money with him, Andrew had come to a conclusion that the best way to support his expensive taste was to seduce older, wealthy men at nearby gay restaurants and bars. However, Andrew's deeply religious mother strongly disapproved of his lifestyle choice. The situation eventually escalated into an argument, during which Andrew threw his mother against a wall, dislocating her shoulder. The incident was the first reported sign of Andrew's violent side, but it would definitely not be the last. It wasn't long before Andrew left home and settled in the Castro district of San Francisco, a center for LGBTQ culture. There, Andrew continued to look for sugar daddies, hiding his poor social background and creating a false identity of wealth and privilege. At the same time, Andrew also spent time selling himself as a prostitute, while developing an insatiable need for drugs and participating in sadistic pornographic movies. His dark side was becoming more prominent day by day. In 1995, Andrew met Norman Blockford, a wealthy gay man. The two began a relationship and even moved in together. Norman happily supported Andrew's expensive taste by providing him with the $2,000 per month allowance, buying him a fancy car, and even giving him access to credit cards. For a moment, Andrew had the life he had always wanted, but then things went sour. Norman discovered that Andrew was not really the person that he claimed to be. Andrew De Silva, the son of a pineapple plantation owner. On top of that, while Norman had initially supported Andrew financially, he didn't approve of the fact that his boyfriend had maxed out all his credit cards. And so the relationship ended, leaving Andrew unable to keep up his luxurious lifestyle. Those close to him said Andrew's mental health began to deteriorate. As criminal profiler Candace DeLong commented, quote, Andrew's self-worth was tied to the finer things in life, what people could do for him. Being accepted in high society and by wealthy people was what he expected. If he didn't get them, he was lost. Around that time, another boyfriend of Andrew's, David Madsen, broke off the relationship with him as he sensed something shady was going on. To Andrew, David had been the love of his life, and he was left crushed as he moved away to Minneapolis. To make things worse, Andrew's friend Jeffrey Trail also wanted nothing to do with Andrew anymore, and he also relocated to Minneapolis. Multiple rejections and the fact that Andrew, for some reason, now believed he was HIV positive had left him depressed, insecure, lonely, and vulnerable, paving the way for what was about to come. While it was later proved that Andrew did not have HIV, his fears, without a doubt, did not do well with his already fragile mental state. Then in April 1997, Andrew traveled to Minneapolis, Minnesota to meet with Jeffrey and David to, quote, settle some business. We will never know what his true intentions were, but we know the results. They were brutal. A couple days after Andrew's arrival, Jeffrey's body was found in David's loft apartment. He had been beaten to death with a claw hammer and rolled up in a rug. Jeffrey's watch had been stopped at 9:55 p.m. It's believed that he had entered David's home shortly before that time on April 27th due to Andrew's invite, who then killed him. On May 3rd, David's body was found on the shore of Rush Lake in Minnesota. He had been shot through the eye and in the back of the head. According to the police, Andrew had first forced David to stay with him in the apartment when Jeffrey's body was there for 2 days before driving to the lake. It seemed like David had tried to make a run, but Andrew had stopped him with a shot in the back before killing him with the bullets in his head. Those close to the two now dead men told the police a unifying factor in the murders was another man named Andrew Cunanan. Authorities were initially slow with their movements. Meanwhile, Andrew drove to Chicago and killed 72-year-old Lee Miglin on May 4th. This time, however, things were a little bit different. First of all, no connection was ever found between the two men. Secondly, when Lee's body was later found, it was evident he had been tortured before literally being overkilled. Lee had been stabbed numerous times, his ribs were broken, and his throat had been cut wide open with a garden bow saw. In addition, around $10,000 was missing from the house, and Andrew had taken Lee's Lexus. Curiously, the police found no signs of forced entry, but Lee's family firmly denies that the two men knew each other beforehand. 5 days later, Andrew took his next victim when he shot 45-year-old caretaker William Reese in New Jersey, just to steal his 1995 red Chevrolet pickup truck. At this point, authorities had caught up with what was happening, and Andrew Cunanan became one of America's most wanted fugitives. Still, it seemed that the killer was always 2 steps ahead of the FBI. Andrew was able to make his way to Miami, where he stayed at the Normandy Plaza Hotel for 2 months. The hotel's night manager would later say that Andrew always paid in cash and altered his appearance often. It was not far from the Normandy Plaza where Andrew would take his 5th and final victim. About 4 miles south was the home of a man whose name most of us recognize, fashion designer and businessman Gianni Versace. Around 8:45 a.m. on July 15th, Versace was on the way back from a coffee shop when he was shot to death execution style, once in the back of the head and once in the left cheek, on the front steps of his Miami Beach mansion. While both a witness and police pursued the shooter, he managed to escape once again. Versace's killing set off one of the biggest manhunts in recent history. But in the end, they didn't have to look very far. Andrew was found a week later, on July 23rd, on an unoccupied houseboat anchored off Collins Avenue, less than 3 miles north of Versace's mansion. A caretaker had informed police that he heard a gunshot inside the boat. While the FBI was on the scene shortly after, it took them 12 hours to announce that the body of Andrew Cunanan had been discovered. It was reported that he had shot himself in the mouth and left no suicide note. Andrew died without giving anyone an explanation for his killing spree. We can only speculate what his motives were. However, jealousy seemed to play a big part in some of the murders. He had been rejected by both Jeffrey and David, who were both successful professionals, while Andrew didn't have a career at all. Versace was also a very successful, rich gay man. Andrew had actually often bragged about meeting Versace once at Colossus, a San Francisco nightclub in 1990, using the fashion designer's name to his advantage in his social circles. To Andrew, Versace represented everything he wanted to be. Some believe Andrew might have killed the fashion icon just to make himself infamous and basically immortal, just like his idol. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. Whatever his motives actually were, Andrew Cunanan will always be remembered as the man who killed Versace. That's today's 10-Minute Murder. Thanks for listening, and you can find photos that go along with this episode on the 10-Minute Murder Instagram and Facebook pages. The links are in the show notes, or you can just search 10-Minute Murder. If you have friends, that's real cool. I'm happy for you, but make sure you let them know about 10-Minute Murder. Thanks for listening. Be safe, and have a good night.